I guess to start off, I'll introduce myself, and then I'll kick it off to other Campo folks, and then our partners in Harnett County. So my name is Gabby Lawler. I'm a senior transportation planner at the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization. And I am overseeing this study on Campo side. I'll hand it off to Shelby.
I am Shelby Powell, Deputy Director with the Capital Area MPO. And thanks to everyone for joining us this evening. And I guess I'll pass it over to Bonnie.
Okay, great. Hi, everybody. I'm Bonnie Parker. I handle our public engagement and communications efforts for Campo. And same thing, thanks for joining, and any questions are more than invited. We will share a recording of this session on our website as well. Anyone who's would prefer not to come off microphone to ask questions is welcome to post them in the chat. We also have the Q&A function, and if there's something that we should interrupt Gabby's presentation and ask, we will, and otherwise we'll just do all the questions at the end. With that, I'll pass it over to one more Campo person I think I saw, and that is Jacob.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Jacob Irving. I'm a transportation planner here at Campo, and I'll be answering some of the questions that I can answer in the Q&A function in the chat. So feel free to ask as many questions that you may have, and I'll try and answer them for you either during the presentation or afterward, along with Gabby and Bonnie. But thanks for joining.
And I guess I'll pass it over to Barry, if you want to introduce yourself, and then Sarah, and then I think with that we can go ahead and get started.
Sounds good. I'm Barry Blevins, General Services and Harnett Area Rural Transit System Director. I'm glad to be a part of this.
Hi there, I'm Sarah Arbor. I'm the Long Range Planner for Harnett County, and also glad to be a part of this.
Thanks, Sarah. And we also have here from the consultant team from WSP, we have Rachel Gaylord-Miles. We've got Leah Weaver and Shivang Shalat, who's been my counterpart overseeing this on the consultant side. So we have them here available in case there are any technical questions about the work being conducted through this study. But with that, I will go ahead and get us started. So again, thank you for joining. We are presenting on the North Harnett Transit Study, which is being completed in conjunction between the Capital Area Metropolitan Planning Organization and Harnett County. And so we're just going to give you an overview of what we are looking to accomplish with the study, what's been done to date, and just where we're at right now. So we already did the welcome and introductions. As I mentioned, I'll go through this presentation and then we will move into Q&A. Feel free to drop comments in the chat or in the Q&A box, or raise your hand if you have a question. And all right, so moving on to the overview. I'll just give you all an overview of what the schedule is with the study, progress that's been completed to date, an overview of what we found and accomplished in phase 1. I'll walk you through how we established the service area and the recommendations for transit service type, and then just a quick overview of public engagement and next steps of what will come after the study concludes. And so just a quick overview, this study was something that Harnett County pursued with us in conjunction with Campo, and there is an interest in the county to explore whether there is a desire or a need for additional transit service in Harnett County. Specifically, it's roughly the northern half of the county because that is the area that overlaps with the capital area MPO or Campo's boundaries. And so it's a two-phase study. First phase is meant to determine whether that there is that desire, interest, and need for transit service for the community. And then through phase two, we've been exploring what the appropriate type of transit service might be. And spoiler alert, we did determine in phase one that there is a desire and there is support for increased transit service. So as you can see here, we are at the tail end of the study. We are wrapping up public engagement with we've got a series of pop-up engagement activities this week, and then a public survey that has been live throughout this second public engagement phase, and that will close this upcoming Monday, April 14th. And then there will be a series of stakeholder engagement meetings to report back to the study stakeholders what we found through the second phase of engagement, and go more in depth into the final recommendations and determine what the implementation will look like. And so with the study progress, so I already mentioned what the study area boundary is, and high level, the study goals were to determine essentially transit supportiveness. And we determined this by evaluating existing travel patterns. And through the first round of engagement, we went out into the community and just provided some Transit 101, like some education about different types of transit that are available. And in a future slide, I'll go a little bit more into how we determine what types of transit to explore. And we assessed what the community and decision makers' desire is for transit. And then we combine that demand with feasible transit service options for the context of the study area. And then throughout the study, we have engaged the public, and we've been working in close coordination with stakeholders. So we have a core technical team that is made up of technical staff in the county, public officials, focus groups, and with Hart's operators. And Hart's is for anybody that's not familiar, they operate the on-demand transit service currently in the county, but typically more geared towards folks trying to access medical services and things of that nature. So a quick summary of what we found in phase one is that there's demand for transit services that allow a little more flexibility than what is currently available. Additionally, there is plenty of demand for part service, and part of the issue is actually that they are at capacity, which is part of what prompted the study, is that they know that there are a lot of folks that need transit service to be able to access destinations. And so most respondents also said that they would use transit for shopping, recreational, and medical trips. In terms of travel patterns, what we found out is that the travel patterns are strongest between Lillington and Anger, and Hart's ridership specifically is strongest near Lillington and between Lillington and Coates. And again, this is specifically looking at the study area, so the northern half of the county. And of the survey respondents, 56% of them, so the majority, were very interested or somewhat interested in using transit. And the stakeholders in the study recognize that there is a need for updated infrastructure and for increased land use density in order to be more supportive of transit service going forward. And again, we found that there there is support from the public and from the stakeholders for more enhanced local services and to be able to travel within the county, not just to adjacent counties. So in order to determine what the service area was going to be, in order to kind of narrow the scope to make it more manageable, we took a look at a variety of factors. So starting with transit propensity, which was basically determined through, or we analyzed this through census data. So taking a look at factors that typically make folks more likely to use transit. So for example, looking at low income, zero vehicle households, this any households with folks with disabilities, things of that nature that would make that typically tell us that somebody is more likely to use transit. So as you can see, the darker colors here represent a higher concentration of population that is more likely to use transit. And then we layered on looking at trip patterns. You see all these bars, and it might look a little complicated, but this is basically just telling us where folks are making trips between these different nodes. And as you can see, the heavier concentration is kind of in this central band of the study area. That's the main takeaway here. And then we took a look at where Hart's ridership currently is, where we're seeing the higher demand and concentrations of destinations. So this is a heat map. So basically, wherever you see those red circles or those bigger circles is where more trips are being made. And then taking a look at key destinations in the study area, and again, you know, the larger share of it is kind of concentrated in this highlighted area. And so with all those different layers and elements, that's how we arrived at the proposed service area. And so I wanted to quickly go over transit appropriateness because as we engaged folks in the first phase, there were some questions of why you know, certain types of transit maybe weren't being considered. And we use this graphic just to provide context for folks to understand that every type of transit is not necessarily applicable in every context. So we're not going to come in and propose something like heavy rail or light rail because one, it is very expensive, but two, you have to have the appropriate land use and density in order to be able to support that type of transit. So what you see highlighted in this blue rectangle are the types of transit that we determined are more fitting for the context in the study area. So we took a look at demand response, microtransit, deviated fixed route, commuter or express bus, and fixed route buses. And again, happy to take any questions if there are any on anything. So feel free to pop comments or questions in the chat. So moving to the different transit services that were considered, we took a more in-depth look into microtransit, fixed route, senior shuttle, and a regional route. And under each of these categories, you see bullet points kind of pointing out some of the characteristics for them. So for microtransit, one of the benefits is that it is flexible. There's multiple different service delivery models and ways that it could be implemented. And there are also examples in peer communities where it's been a very successful solution. With fixed route, the benefits with this transit service is that it's reliable. It's something that's a familiar service type. Buses, you know, folks understand what you're talking about when you talked about fixed route bus service. But one of the downsides is that it would require a heavier lift to implement in the study area because it would require additional infrastructure improvements, basically. And with the senior shuttle, with that option, it would be more targeted towards certain groups. It would be shorter routes and shorter time spans likely. and it would serve different areas on different days. So that, again, that would be for a very specific audience, or potential writers. For a regional route, this would be more so focused for folks that are maybe commuting to adjacent communities. So if they're going up north to Wake County, it's more commuter based. So it would be focused on AM or PM peak travel times. And in this table, you just see a comparison between those different options across a variety of different elements. So taking a look at operating cost estimates, capital costs, potential ridership that you would be looking at with any of these options, level of implementation effort, service area that you could potentially cover with a given service, service span, frequency, how convenient it would be, and the flexibility to implement it and to modify the service going forward. And then for public input, we just noted how well it aligned with what we heard in phase 1 when we were trying to gauge from the community, beyond just, are you interested in transit, but specifically what type of transit would be fitting for your travel needs. So the takeaway here is just that microtransit wound up being the most compatible across the different elements that we were considering for the study and for this study area. So the proposed service is microtransit with external connections, and the reason behind it is that it's flexible, it's scalable, so it's easier to basically modify the service depending on how the county, how transit riders are using the service. It's easier to, shift service hours or service days, things like that. And it combines aspects of the other service types that were explored. It wouldn't be as heavy of a lift in terms of putting in fixed infrastructure, such as sidewalks. And it's not to say that the county should not pursue expanding pedestrian facilities, simply to say that it wouldn't be as heavy of a lift on the front end to be able to implement transit service. Because with microtransit, you have depending on the service model that you pursue, you have the ability to transport people from doorstep to doorstep. So missing sidewalks aren't as much of a barrier in that scenario. And another pro is that there is the option to use existing Hart's fleet, at least in the short term. It would provide connections to high demand locations outside of the immediate service area, and it would allow for connections to regional transit. And by that, we mean, so with this being the service area, and I think you all can see my mouse, hopefully, otherwise you have no idea what I'm pointing at, but that highlighted yellow area, which is the proposed transit service area. With the microtransit, you would be able to travel anywhere within that area, and you would also be able to make regional connections up north to those park and rides that are flagged up there. So that would allow connections to existing transit service in Wake County. And then to the south, it would allow connection to those nodes, which are those are very frequented destinations currently through Hart's. And so that is why we also included that, because we heard that there's a high demand to be able to access those destinations. And so, as I mentioned, we are in our second phase and final phase of public engagement for this study. It will conclude when the survey closes next Monday. And the purpose of the public engagement this round has been to report back to the community that this is the recommendation that was developed based on what you all told us in phase 1. And does this align well with what you told us? Is this something that seems like it would address transportation needs in the community? And so to the right, you just see some of the materials that we have. So we have a booklet that just basically provides a very condensed overview of everything that I just presented, the purpose of the study, and an overview of the recommendations, and then just examples for how microtransit could be used, and the overall schedule for the study. So to recap, I wanted to outline basically what is being accomplished through this study versus what will have to come beyond the life of it. So through this study, in the first phase, we sought out to answer, is transit service viable and desired? And the answer was yes. And then we took a look at what transit service is viable and would be more quickly implemented. And to that, we answered microtransit. And then there will also be a phased implementation plan, which will provide basically recommendations to county officials should they choose to pursue implementing the transit service of, all right, it's positioning them for next steps to accomplish that. So that is what's being accomplished through the study, but we have had some questions about specifically when service would be implemented, and that is something that is beyond the scope of this study. That's to be determined. That will be basically in the county's hands. So I just wanted to make that distinction. And with that, I will open it up for any questions. I'd like to field any questions specifically about the recommendation coming out of the study or what I've just presented to you now. And from there, we can move on to any questions or comments that folks might have about what comes beyond the life of the study. So with that, I will stop jabbering and let anybody that might have any questions speak up. And I'll look to my colleague Jacob as well to field anything that might come through the chat or Q&A.
And Gabby, on a technical note, this is Bonnie. Not everyone has the ability to immediately unmute. We would be happy to have anyone ask questions verbally if you would like. Just raise your hand and we'll unmute. I don't know, Jacob, if you're, I'll go ahead and just say that out loud to Gabby. So one question, and actually it has been one of our frequently asked questions, is whether or not it was explored to go to Dunn or to include Dunn as one of the external regional connection points. Would you be able to speak to that point?
Yeah, good question, James. Yeah, we have received that question a few times. So basically, the only reason that it was not included is because it does not overlap with Campo's boundaries. That's not to say that the transit service being recommended could not extend into the town of Dunn. And on another note, I did want to point out that Harnett County, the Board of Commissioners did ask staff to pursue basically a similar transit study to cover the remainder of the county that was not included with this study, because they recognize that there is an interest in transit service in the community. So there might be more basically coming up. Stay tuned for. Shivang, you got your hand up?
Yes, thank you, Gabby. To add to that, we recognize that there is demand for microtransit access in Dunn. So we, in our recommendation, downtown Dunn, if you can go back a few slides, Gabby, where we have the map, is one of the external points where you see there, right there. So what it means is you can access this study, the service area from Dunn or to Dunn, but it's you cannot start and stop your trip from, let's say, from Dunn to Betsy Johnson Hospital, things like that. So again, all those things need to be ironed out. But in addition to what Gabby mentioned, we did recognize that, and that's why we added an external connection to downtown Dunn.
James, I
Okay.
see your question. You asked whether the study includes cost estimates. So that's, and I might hand, I'll take the initial stab at this, and then Shivang, I might pass it over to you. But so this study is more, it's a feasibility study, so it's not going to go very detailed cost estimates. As we compared the different transit options, we were looking at kind of an order of magnitude of how the different options compared in terms of how much it might cost to provide a given service, both across capital and operating services. But this, I don't believe, is going to go into like detailed cost estimates. Is that correct, Shivang?
Yeah, that is correct. Although we did look at peer services and what their cost estimates are, and based on that and based on the current HARTs per hour cost estimates, and we just extrapolated that to the service hours. That's not an exact method, but it gives you a ballpark of the cost estimates. Rachel, do you want to add to that?
No, I think that covers it. Yep, we'll have a range of cost, looking at some example communities around the state.
Thanks for the questions, James.
And Gabby and everyone, I'm gonna post some typical questions we receive in the chat, and to help you, Gabby, with potentially answering these questions that people may have. So I'll put them in the chat for you.
Thanks, Jacob.
And Gabby, this is Bonnie. I will read them out loud for the recording purposes. So closed captions capture this. Real quick, the first one is, what safety measures would be put into place to make microtransit more appealing compared to maybe private rideshare companies? Do we know anything about safety measures? That was one we were seeing in the survey a couple times.
Yeah, I think we discussed this a little bit in I don't remember at what point, but Shivang, I will pass it off to you. I know we discussed a few, but I feel like you all have a better understanding of that.
The discussion led to the safety measures in terms of the driver or the passengers. I think it would be in line of what the current HART service would provide. We don't have any specific additional measures in place at this stage because this is a feasibility study. But again, Rachel, if you have anything to add to that.
Yeah, I would just say it's transit operations, so there's certain rules and regulations that would have to apply to those. And so those may not be applicable to a private ride sharing service, but applicable to transit operations, and similar to what drivers today with HARTs also are complying with.
I know there is the HART service that does help with some of our disabled or mobility impaired community members. But one question we do get is, do we anticipate that the service would be handicap accessible? And in the survey, a couple people referred to other microtransit in the area, like Wake Forest. Rachel, I think you had a few case studies that were shared during the life of the study where they did have handicap accessible vehicles. Is that a known at this point for the microtransit service?
My certainly recommendation, and yep, I think it's standard practice in the communities that we looked at, that they at least have several vehicles that are handicap accessible, that the ability to assist a wheelchair and ride transport for a wheelchair.
Right, and adding to that, I think what we were discussing is that there would be the potential to use existing Hart's fleet in the immediate, like at the outset. And I do believe that all the Hart's vehicles are handicap accessible, if I'm not mistaken, right, Barry? Unless you had a turn.
If I could, the majority are ADA compliant, American Disabilities Act compliant. We do have several vehicles that are not. However, if Microtransit commissioners approved moving forward Microtransit and it fell under Hart's, we would have to apply the same ADA requirements that any public transit system has to do. Microtransit itself would be a public transit system, so even if there's a third party doing that transportation, they would have to comply with ADA, at least have it accessible. So it may not be that every vehicle had it, but a majority of vehicles more than likely would be required to have ADA compliant vehicles.
Thanks, Barry.
And the last one on here is, will the service be accessible to individuals who don't use a smartphone? I know you spoke to that earlier, Gabby, about how you schedule rides, but will you just restate that?
Sure. Yeah, so I know it's typically standard with Microtransit where yes, part of the appeal is that you can use an app on your smartphone to request a ride and to schedule that, but it's standard with Microtransit service now. Depending on how you implement it, there's typically an option where you can have a dial-in. So for folks who are not as comfortable or maybe don't have access to a smartphone, you would be able to call an operator essentially to schedule the ride and to plan it out that way. Again, that'll be a little bit further down the line of determining the exact details for the service that gets implemented, but certainly that should not be a barrier to anybody who doesn't use a smartphone.
Gabby, I don't think that everyone has had the chance to see some of the comments we've gotten, but one recent one that may have been confusing this type of service with other bigger transit services like BRT, but one question we got today was, would a microtransit service require any road changes or roadway improvements in order to get the service started? I thought that was kind of an interesting, unique question, but one that might pop into people's heads more frequently. So can we add that one into the recording? Would you mind responding to that about roadway infrastructure?
Yeah, sure. So that's another one of the benefits and one of the reasons that we keep saying that the microtransit would be a more flexible and easier to implement is because you wouldn't require any additional roadway improvements or anything comparable to bus rapid transit, where you might have a dedicated transit lane which requires infrastructure improvements and things of that nature, but you would not require that with microtransit. So oftentimes it's just like a van or something, which as long as there's a road there, it can access it. I might toss another question out there that more so came up among stakeholders earlier on in the study, and maybe I can tap on Barry as well to expand. But there was a question about how the proposed service would work in conjunction with existing HART service, and basically how those two would be meant to interact. And I think on some level, the benefit to this would be that it could free up some capacity for existing HART service, and it would also be able to basically address different trip purposes. So, for example, if somebody is in Lillington and they want to access a downtown, but they don't want to drive, they could use microtransit. So things of that nature. So it's just meant to provide another transportation option for folks who either don't want to drive or maybe don't have access to a car. And ultimately freeing up more capacity for HARTs for the nature of its trips. But Barry, I don't know if there was anything that you wanted to add specifically on that as well.
Sure. So I think that microtransit offers that flexible option, as you keep saying, in that it is. So right now, if you wanted to schedule a trip on with Hearts, as we are demand response, there is generally a 2-day window where you ask for that ride. However, microtransit is the flexible portion is if it's available and you call in, then your trip would be quicker for that particular day, for example, which it would free up capacity on Heart. So, I mean, so microtransit would actually supplement the system we have now. And I think it would be a viable option for somebody who needs to go quickly to a drugstore to pick up a drug that they needed because they just came back from another appointment or something, a medical appointment. So I think that's the beauty of microtransit and that flexibility on how it's scheduled and how it's executed.
Very good point. Thanks for noting that, Barry.
Jacob, I can't tell if anyone else has joined. I think we may have covered most questions. Do we want to give folks another minute before, or just a few seconds really, before Gabby closes out her presentation?
On my end, I don't see any other joiners. So I think that's a good idea.
Any other questions, team? Otherwise, Gabby, feel free to continue on.
Yeah, not seeing any, so we can advance. A second. Okay, so we can move on to the question of what comes next. So as I kept mentioning, there are certain steps that will need to be taken beyond the life of this study, and what comes next and how do we get this implemented is something that comes beyond this study. I did see a few comments or questions on the survey regarding funding and how basically what the plan is for that. And the answer is not incredibly direct, but part of it depends on the nature of the service. And in terms of timing and things of that nature. That's part of what we're trying to give the message to folks, that if this truly is something that that the community would like to have, then that's something you'll need to voice to your elected officials in the county and just let them know that it's a priority. And so, through the study, we'll deliver the phased implementation plan, so it'll just give county staff and officials guidance on what to do next if they do want to pursue this. And from there, it'll essentially be in the county's hands, and not to put our our study partners on the spot. But I was gonna, I guess, offer this opportunity for any county partners to speak towards that. If there have been any discussions on the county level about what the desire is moving forward.
This is Barry. So I think that it's really just an option, and I'm not sure it's been taken up in any particular focus on whether or not this study will, immediately go into the next phase. But it'll be something that like I said, the Board of Commissioners, directs the staff to do. So hopefully the final presentation and the final report is given, and then I guess from that point forward, we'll find out, what the direction is. Do I believe it's going to happen overnight? No, I don't. However, you never can tell. So it's really, if the demand from the public is there, I mean, that might be a huge consideration on how we move forward.
I guess I'll point out one other thing that I guess along the lines of James' question earlier about including other portions of the county. So I know that Barry and some of his colleagues at Hartz are have been pursuing funding through the North Carolina Department of Transportation, through DOT, to be able to complete a microtransit study for the county. And I know that DOT reached out to them and let them know that they have a very strong application and that they are interested in providing the funding, but it's more a matter of the funding being there to be able to complete that study. But all that to say, just that the county is making strides and trying to move the needle to be able to provide this service if that is what the community wants. So I just wanted to toss that in there.
Thanks, Gabby. That kind of brings us to the next point. I mean, so DOT is interested in funding a microtransit study. Doesn't mean they will, and it's just based on the funding stream that they have available. I do know they're not taking applications this year. I did get a response for that, but again, their planners have told us that we're high on the list to be funded. So if money comes available to DOT to do the study, I'm hoping we'll see something fairly soon. And for those out there who may wonder a little bit about the Dunn area is in the Mid-Carolina region for planning. The Fayetteville area Metropolitan Planning Organization has shown an interest to doing another study on the southern portion of the county. It has nothing to do with this. However, we are trying our best, like as you said, to find new options for people to get transportation in Harnett County.
Thanks, Barry.
I think we were going to offer one more if anybody had questions following the next steps, and then that is the end of this presentation for purposes of also recording and posting for brevity. Just want to leave the line open here for a second in case there are any other clarifications or questions. All right, Gabby, take us home.
All right, I guess without seeing any other questions or comments coming in, that'll conclude the first presentation for the 4 o'clock slot. And thank you to everybody who listened in. And I was going to go back to, I think by now folks know how to reach me. But the contact information is there for myself, Gabby Lawler, and for Shivang Shalat, my counterpart at WSP, who is working on this with us. So thank you. And for anybody who has not taken the survey, do so before Monday, please.